Season 3 of Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda is, in my opinion, the worst season in the series. There are some actual decent ideas for individual episodes throughout this season, but the difference between that and seasons 1 and 2, and even the later seasons, is while the idea is sound, its implementation is flawed. A lot of the production values take a dip. Certain stories where just the general idea on paper sounds good, the individual dialogue or the individual just writing of scenes seems to suffer, things feel rushed, it doesn't have the quality that some of these story concepts deserve. And even the ideas that continue on from season 1 and 2, such as the romance between Tyr and Becca.
Ouch! Tell me again why this is good for me.
A chain is only as strong as its weakest link.
Who you calling a link on a sawzy?
Now this warship, her capabilities, it makes us complacent. We may have to engage the enemy using nothing but our teeth and nails.
See? Me, I like to shoot my enemies, preferably while hiding behind a nice big rock.
Becca, I need... Oh. Excuse me, I didn't know that you two were, What were you?
Nothing. Shut up. Just a little hand to, hand.
Or the mystery of Trance's abilities and her relationship with Dylan and trying to figure all that out. There's a lot of great stuff that still continues on into season 3, but it's not handled as well as in season 1 and 2. It's just never done with as much class as in season 1 and 2. It's never written with any sort of just... There's no subtle nature to the writing and the dialogue anymore. Everything's just sort of black and white and in your face. And occasionally that can lead to an episode like The Illusion of Majesty, which on first viewing is a good episode because it's probably the funniest episode in the entire series, and it seems well done to the point of just enjoying it. But after you watch it that first time, you really think about it, and you realize it's a great representation of what's happened to the series, where it has so much more slapstick comedy, it has just so much more action without any real drive to the narrative, and the worst perpetrator of this is Dylan Hunt, Kevin Sorbo's character. Dylan starts to rattle off more and more one-liners. There was always little quips that would come from the character that were kind of funny and usually at Tyr's expense, and they used to have this really good just verbal sparring back and forth. And instead that turned into his little catchphrase of the episode, or his little references here and there that just seemed goofy in a way and seemed out of place. And Dylan Hunt's character started off in season 1 as someone who is very arrogant, but in a different way than now. He was someone who was in a place of power, he was captain of the Andromeda, he was captain of a flagship, he could always call on support. If he made a bad decision, there was always backup. And then that went into a character who is suddenly brought down to earth, who is very humbled by a situation, realizing that as he makes mistakes throughout season 1 and the beginning of season 2, that he needs to change because he no longer has that. He can no longer be that arrogant man. He can still and has to be the confident man, but he has to lose the more arrogant nature of his personality. And that starts to go away in season 2, and it's a bit of an interesting character change. And then suddenly in season 3, he just becomes an ass, really. Dylan Hunt becomes a bit of an ass. And it just, a lot of the things with Tyr, the back and forth, it just doesn't work the same way as it did in season 1 and 2. There are a few individual scenes, but typically they're good because they're carried by Keith Hamilton Cobb, and they're carried by the character of Tyr in spite of what's going on with the dialogue and acting with Dylan Hunt. And that tends to happen with a lot of scenes throughout this season where one character or another, you can see the actor really trying to remain in that season 1 and 2 mode, trying to really be true to the character, even though some of the words they're saying, some of the actions they're taking just do not seem quite right for the character. They don't seem exactly the way things should be portrayed. And you can see there's an effort on the side of a lot of the actors. I really give a lot of credit to the cast in this season, where things really were imperfect. They were really trying, you could see it. And there's a lot of ad-libbing going on that tried to improve the character. Gordon Michael Wolvett, who plays Harper, actually talks about it in one of the interviews, very briefly, trying obviously to give a more politically correct answer, but he doesn't bash the writers or anything, but he does say how occasionally he would step into a line differently because he would think reading the dialogue, this is not what my character would say, or this is what my character would say, but he wouldn't say it in that way, and he would sort of retell it in his own way. And depending on the director, they could get away with that, and other ones they would want them to stick more with the script. So that's kind of what led to the on and off with the dialogue throughout this season, and the writing in general, where there was some good and there was some bad, but it was very inconsistent. And speaking of inconsistent, I talked about in Season 2 the ridiculousness of how they just got this instant Commonwealth, mix it in a jar, shake it up, you have a Commonwealth. Made no sense. And then suddenly in this season, you have Captain Dylan Hunt of the Andromeda from 300 years in the past, someone who was a leader, basically. He was the equivalent of, Captain Picard on the front of the Federation with the Enterprise. 300 years in the past, he's the one who has the functioning knowledge of the old Commonwealth. He is of the old High Guard. And yet, somehow in this season, I get the idea that he doesn't want to have a seat of power in the new Commonwealth. He wants to be a captain, do the Captain Kirk thing, and remain captain of the Andromeda, rather than become an admiral or a dignitary or anything. I get that. But somehow, this established Commonwealth, this newly established Commonwealth, starts to butt heads with Dylan Hunt, and they start disagreeing with him and disrespecting him, and he really becomes, that rebel captain who just doesn't listen, but oh darn, every once in a while, he defies us and we have to punish him, but he becomes the hero at the end, and that storyline makes no sense. With this newly established Commonwealth, he would still be a highly regarded hero. They would still just look to him differently than they do. The way they portray the Commonwealth in Season 3, it feels like an established political structure with an established military that's been around for at least decades. Something that is just very concrete, something that is just there and has always been there in a way, and he is just another one of these captains in their vast fleet instead of what it really should be. And it just is not handled well at all, and just is very illogical. And you have other elements throughout the series where in this newly established Commonwealth, let's not think about the idea of how ridiculous that is, but okay, we have an established, working, functioning Commonwealth. The Andromeda Ascendant, the best ship in your fleet, a proven vessel with a proven captain, is obviously now going to no longer be running with a skeleton crew. They have the people, and they are going to be fully staffed at all times. It just makes sense. And you'll see that for a couple episodes, and then randomly you'll get an episode where the original cast, the primary cast, is alone on the Andromeda Ascendant. You never see another soul. You walk down a hallway, it's empty. There actually be situations that occur where even if you just had one or two random people walking around the ship, there would be no problem. All this stuff could be solved just by having extra crew, and there's zero explanation. Again, one episode, if you're walking around, there'll be people in the hall talking, the ship looks full, you go on the bridge, there's the guards standing at the door, there's people manning all the stations, and the very next episode, there are 5-6 people on the ship. It makes no sense. There's no continuity whatsoever throughout this season. It's all over the place. And you have some episodes that are very drama heavy that, when they're true to the characters, work well. When they're not true to the characters, they fall flat. You have some that are just pure comedy. You have, they're trying to figure out the new version of Trance's character, and it turns out that she goes through these weird changes where in Season 2 she's this disgruntled warrior Trance who he's been through so much, and you can kind of see where they're going with that character. She's been through this horrible timeline where she came from this alternate future, and she's this hardened warrior version of Trance, and they try to bring that down, and make her a little bit more of an in-between of gold and purple trance and focus more on, they talk a lot about her, and they even show some scenes of her bonsai tree representing her exploring all the different pathways. As she's pruning the bonsai tree, she's cutting off different possible futures, trying to find this perfect possible future. And that's actually, there's an entire episode focused on that, where she is existing in all times, in all places, in all possible futures at once, and gives you an interesting insight into the character of Trance.
Okay, that did not work.
But sadly, outside of that, those few moments in that episode, they never explore that further and really take it where it should be. I mean, it's a very interesting, aspect to that character. It's a very interesting plot line, but they just don't explore it into the depth and complexity that they could. It's very simple, very surface, and in the process, characters like Transgemini become kind of muddled because her changes seem too sudden and they don't seem to work. You have her, when she's first revealed in the middle of season 2 in Ouroboros, she's a kick-butt warrior, and then suddenly at some point along the line in season 3, she seems so subdued to the point where she's almost weak. She's more confident in a combat or an action situation than Purple Trance, but she magically lost her ability to, in the beginning she probably could have kicked Tyr's butt, and now as far as the best fighter on the crew, she would be somewhere towards the bottom. It makes no sense. It's illogical. Rami's character goes through so many changes. There's always been a little bit of inconsistency as far as Rami, the ship's avatar, as far as what her abilities are, as far as some of the abilities of the ship itself. There's always been not quite the consistency you'd expect, but in season 3, it just kind of goes out the window, and Rami's abilities and the Andromeda's abilities are whatever the writer decides they are within that episode. And, like I said, though, there are some good story ideas throughout season 3. They're just not always done very well. And I think one of the things that makes me dislike season 3 the most is they slowly but surely ruined my favorite character, Tyr Anasazi. Some of these story ideas, as I said, carried over from season 1 and 2, and one of those is one that started the whole way back towards the beginning of season 1 with Tyr and his wife Freya in Double Helix. And you find out that, at that point everyone thinks that the Orca Pride was destroyed and his wife died, and that's actually not true, and Tyr knows this is not true. His wife survived, he has a son. And later on in season 1, he actually steals from the Drago Katsov homeworld the bones, the remains of Drago Museveni, the original Nietzschean, the founder of his people. And the way the Nietzscheans work, because they've weeded out all these different genetic variabilities, taken DNA out from their gene pool to try and make these perfect people, they've narrowed it down so much that over the centuries there is a possibility, it's still a 1 in a trillion type thing, but over the course of thousands of years you could possibly have an exact duplicate, a genetic reincarnation of an individual. It is entirely a plausible thing because they've whittled everything down so much, and they're in a way almost interbred in a perfectionist way. It's a very interesting concept to think about, and they explore it a little bit through seasons 1 and 2, and it's carried into season 3, where it turns out that Tyr and Freya's son, Tyr's son, is the genetic reincarnation of Drago Museveni. And Tyr, he steals the bones because the bones are the only way to prove when this genetic progenitor of Drago Museveni is real. It's the only way to verify that's who that person is, and their legend is that when he comes back, he will come back to finally unify all the Nietzschean prides and be their leader. So what Tyr does is he goes and he finds the best geneticist in the galaxy, and he steals DNA from his son and compares it to the bones of Drago Museveni and injects it into himself, and does all these different tricky things to make people think that he is actually the progenitor. And it's an interesting storyline, but it falls flat because eventually it gets to the point where Tyr stops acting like Tyr. He's not the same character by the end of season 3. He becomes more of this whining, just conniving, underhanded guy instead of this survivalist who is, of course, all out for himself because survival is the number one mandate, but at the same time he's very honorable, and he was going through changes where he starts doing things that would not logically be simply for his benefit. He starts doing things to, say, save Becca, or do things that are against his better nature, that he goes into a dangerous situation in spite of himself to save someone else, and he's struggling with that internally. It goes against his Nietzschean nature and how he's changing, and just all these different things that he has in place, all these safeguards. He has plan A, B, C, and D to get out of any situation, and he's always toying with Dylan, and they have all this back and forth, and they're always playing each other, and that it leads up to this great just situation where you have such a complex character who has his hands and everything, and they just write it off, and it falls apart. And when he, at the end of season 3, he makes the most illogical choices. He tricks the Nietzscheans and joins all the prides together right at the end of the season. He abandons the Andromeda and starts an all-out war that somehow this massive established commonwealth that in less than 2 years came together, which should have taken like decades, Tyr destroys the commonwealth in the course of a couple episodes. The whole thing is just ridiculous. It's like, alright, well, that didn't last too long. Got about a year out of that new commonwealth, and season 3 ends with this great Nietzschean alliance destroying the commonwealth, surprising them. It's a second rise of the Nietzscheans destroying the commonwealth from within, and Dylan is betrayed again by his closest ally, a Nietzschean, and it brings back all these old memories, and it's not handled well at all. It's illogical. They, in many ways, throughout most of the season, kind of forget about the Magog and the world ship, which a lot of that was taken care of in season 2, but there's still something out there that could have been explored with the Magog that's not brought to fruition. You have weird things like Rev Bem's character comes back in a warped form, and I mean the costume changes because the original actor left in season 2 because he couldn't handle the costume anymore. He's getting all these rashes and things, and they could work it for the character, but his return makes no sense. It should never have happened. It should never happen in this weird form. It's completely illogical. Throughout the entire season, I think the only really good episode, there's one where it's a giant flashback episode where Dylan is thinking about Caharis Rade, and it's a really interesting alternate universe flashback where they show what would have happened if on that bridge in the first episode, the premiere episode, where Caharis Rade and Dylan are fighting. What if Dylan had not killed Rade? Instead, the other way around. What if Caharis Rade had killed Dylan and survived 300 years in the future when the Eureka Maru came about and rescued him? And that's actually a very fascinating episode. I really like that one. It shows a really different side to things. It's an interesting story arc. I really enjoy it until you get to the last couple minutes, because the entire episode is basically set up to prove that the only way to the perfect possible future, the only real way you could take, would be for Dylan to survive. Dylan had to. He was destined to survive because he's the hero. He's perfect. If Caharis Rade had been in charge, everything would have fallen apart. It would have been disaster for the galaxy. It just seems like it was this great episode in the beginning, and then at the end, it just feels like this Dylan Hunt ego boost.
Your mission is failing, Captain.
I had some setbacks, it's true. But I don't believe in failure.
That is why we thought you were the one. The one to restore the Commonwealth. Forge civilization where anarchy once ruled. Lead our armies into the battle to come.
But you don't believe that anymore.
No. I have seen the future, Captain. I've lived it. I know what happens. Your life can still mean something. You still have contributions to make, but you are not the one.
Then who is?
I think you know who.
And kind of ruins it, but again, that's the whole way this season 3 is structured. There are a lot of great ideas and potential there that are just not really thought through and aren't handled well, and then you end up bringing about the downfall of one of my favorite characters by making him do things that are out of character. And overall, it's just not a very good season. But if you get into the series, it's definitely worth a watch to finish off the series. Definitely continue through season 3 for those good elements. And it's the best example that I can give you of my conflicted feelings with Andromeda. How on the one hand, I really love the series and the characters, and on the other hand, it's just, I don't know. It's watching season 3, I think Kevin Sorbo puts it best.
Disappointed!